On a Tuesday afternoon in February of 2008, the most ubiquitous retail empire on Earth committed an act of deliberate financial sabotage. They locked the glass doors of 7,100 stores simultaneously across the United States. They turned away millions of loyal customers. They taped a simple, understated sign to the glass that read, "We are taking time to perfect our espresso. Great espresso requires practice. That's why we're dedicating ourselves to honing our craft." Wall Street analysts were absolutely horrified. Competitors openly laughed. Dunkin' Donuts immediately launched a predatory marketing campaign, offering cheap lattes to the millions of stranded, uncaffeinated commuters. In a single afternoon, this stunt cost the company an estimated $6 million in completely unrecoverable, lost revenue. It was a brutal, self-inflicted wound. It looked like the chaotic flailing of a dying brand. But they weren't retreating. They weren't hiding. They were executing one of the most desperate, audacious, and ultimately successful corporate turnarounds in the history of modern capitalism. They were systematically unlearning a decade of terrible, highly profitable habits. The mechanism behind this massive shutdown wasn't just about learning how to pull a better shot of espresso. It was a psychological masterclass in operational discipline. It is a framework of extreme cultural realignment that almost no modern corporation has the stomach to execute. We are going to reveal exactly what that framework is and how you can apply it to your own enterprise a little later in this breakdown. First, we need to examine the rot. We need to look at the bloated, automated, and soulless entity that this company had quietly become in the pursuit of infinite scale. So how did the undisputed king of global coffee lose its soul to efficiency, and how did a dramatic, incredibly painful return to its fundamental roots pull it back from the brink of total financial ruin? That is the exact question we are answering today. To understand the genius of the 2008 turnaround, you must first understand the depth of the betrayal. Let's go back to the origin of the modern Starbucks experience. In 1983, a young Howard Schultz walked the cobblestone streets of Milan, Italy. He was a marketing director for a tiny, obscure coffee bean roaster in Seattle called Starbucks. In Milan, he experienced a revelation that would fundamentally alter global consumer behavior. He didn't just drink coffee. He experienced the Italian espresso bar. It was a symphony of the senses. He heard the aggressive, rhythmic hissing of the steam wands. He smelled the overwhelming, rich aroma of freshly roasted beans being ground on demand. Most importantly, he witnessed the deep, personal connection between the barista and the customer. The barista knew their names. They knew their families. The coffee shop was not a restaurant. It was the third place. Sociologists define the first place as the home and the second place as the workplace. Schultz realized that America desperately lacked a third place. A safe, comfortable, welcoming environment that existed purely for human connection, community gathering, and accessible luxury. He returned to Seattle, eventually bought the company, and built the Starbucks empire on this exact philosophical foundation. For over a decade, it was a masterpiece of experiential retail. But then came the late 1990s. Starbucks went public, and Wall Street demands only one thing: infinite, relentless growth. To satisfy the shareholders, Starbucks began opening stores at a terrifying, unprecedented velocity. At their peak, they were opening an astonishing 7 new stores every single day. They were expanding across the globe, blanketing entire cities in green mermaid logos. But scale is the enemy of intimacy. When you are opening thousands of stores a year, you cannot rely on artisan baristas meticulously handcrafting individual beverages. You need extreme, standardized efficiency. You need speed. So Starbucks began making a series of microscopic, highly logical operational decisions. Each decision saved money. Each decision increased output. And each decision systematically murdered the soul of the company. First, they attacked the beans. Historically, Starbucks ground fresh coffee beans in the store, constantly throughout the day. The ambient smell of a Starbucks was intoxicating. But shipping fresh beans is logistically difficult and has a short shelf life. So the operations team introduced flavor-locked packaging. They roasted and ground the beans at massive central facilities, sealed them in airtight bags, and shipped them globally. It was incredibly efficient. It drastically reduced waste. It dramatically improved the supply chain. But it completely eradicated the legendary coffee aroma from the stores. Suddenly, a Starbucks smelled like nothing. The sensory hook was gone. Next, they attacked the machines. In the early days, baristas used traditional manual La Marzocco espresso machines. Making a latte was a physical performance. The barista had to grind the beans, tamp the grounds, lock the portafilter, and manually control the extraction. It was a craft, but manual machines require extensive training. They are slow. They create bottlenecks during the morning rush. So Starbucks replaced them with towering, automated espresso machines. The new machines were foolproof. You pushed a button and the machine did everything. It was faster. It was more consistent. But the new automated machines were massive. They were so tall that they completely blocked the line of sight between the barista and the customer. The theatrical performance of coffee making was hidden behind a wall of plastic and metal. The human connection was physically severed. The barista was no longer an artisan. They were an assembly line worker, pumping vanilla syrup. Finally, they attacked the store design. To maximize foot traffic and revenue, Starbucks introduced the drive-thru. They replaced the plush, comfortable couches with hard, unforgiving wooden chairs to encourage faster table turnover. They streamlined the aesthetics until the stores felt less like a bohemian coffeehouse and more like a sterile, fast food waiting room. Financially, it worked brilliantly. Revenues soared. The stock price climbed. But culturally, they were bleeding to death. This is the dip in the corporate J-curve. This is the moment of maximum invisible friction. By 2007, the cracks in the foundation were beginning to show. Same-store sales growth began to rapidly decelerate. Customer satisfaction scores plummeted. The macroeconomic environment was also turning toxic. The 2008 financial crisis was looming on the horizon. Consumers were tightening their belts. And suddenly, paying $4 for a mediocre latte handed to you through a drive-thru window didn't feel like an accessible luxury anymore. It felt like a ripoff. To make matters worse, predatory competitors were circling. McDonald's launched the McCafe line, offering premium espresso drinks at a fraction of the cost. Dunkin' Donuts aggressively revamped their coffee menu. They realized that if Starbucks was just going to offer automated fast food coffee, they could beat Starbucks at the fast food game. Starbucks had abandoned its unassailable moat, the premium third-place experience, to fight in the trenches of fast food convenience. And they were losing. In 2007, the stock completely collapsed. It plummeted by an agonizing 42%. Howard Schultz had stepped down as CEO in 2000, transitioning to the role of chairman. But he was watching his life's work slowly disintegrate from the boardroom. He could see what the operations executives could not. On Valentine's Day, 2007, Schultz sat down at his computer and wrote one of the most famous internal memos in corporate history. He titled it, "The Commoditization of the Starbucks Experience." He sent it to the CEO, Jim Donald, and the entire executive leadership team. The memo was a devastating, brutally honest indictment of the company's own success. Schultz outlined exactly how the pursuit of efficiency had destroyed the romantic theater of the brand. He pointed out the towering espresso machines, the sterile store designs, and the loss of the coffee aroma. He practically begged the leadership to aggressively course-correct. He warned them that if they did not restore the soul of the company, they would face an existential crisis. The executive team largely ignored him. They viewed the memo as the nostalgic rambling of a founder who didn't understand modern retail scale. They doubled down on expansion. They introduced hot breakfast sandwiches to drive morning revenue. This was the breaking point. The breakfast sandwiches were prepackaged and warmed in massive ovens behind the counter. When the cheese melted, it released a strong, pungent odor. The faint, lingering smell of coffee was completely obliterated by the overpowering stench of burnt cheddar cheese and factory-farmed sausage. Starbucks had officially become a fast food restaurant. Schultz could not take it anymore. In January of 2008, the board of directors fired Jim Donald. Howard Schultz returned as the chief executive officer of Starbucks. He was walking back into a burning building. The stock was at a multi-year low. Employee morale was decimated. The public narrative was that Starbucks was a fading fad, soon to be crushed by McDonald's. Schultz knew that minor, incremental changes would not save the company. A complete, violent amputation of their bad habits was required. He didn't start by launching a new marketing campaign. He started by halting the engine of growth. Within weeks of taking the helm, Schultz announced that Starbucks would completely cease its aggressive domestic expansion. He fired executives. He slashed bureaucratic middle management. Most painfully, he announced the permanent closure of 600 underperforming stores across the United States. He laid off thousands of partners. It was an agonizing decision, but he knew the company had to shrink in order to survive. But cutting costs doesn't fix a broken product. He had to fix the coffee. And that brings us back to that fateful Tuesday afternoon on February 26, 2008. Schultz realized that a massive portion of his workforce, over 135,000 baristas, had never actually been taught how to make a proper espresso. They had only been taught how to push a button on an automated machine. They didn't understand the chemistry of the extraction. They didn't understand the visual cue of the perfect crema, the golden, caramel-colored foam that sits on top of a properly pulled shot. If the shot poured too fast, it was weak and sour. If it poured too slow, it was bitter and burnt. To rebuild the culture of the company, he had to rebuild the pride of the frontline worker. So he closed the company. All 7,100 stores. At exactly 5:30 p.m. local time, the doors locked. For 3.5 hours, every single Starbucks barista in America watched a direct, unvarnished video message from Howard Schultz. He apologized to them. He admitted that leadership had failed them. Then the training began. Managers poured thousands of gallons of milk down the drains. They pulled tens of thousands of espresso shots, analyzing the pour time, studying the crema, and tasting the extraction. They practiced until it was perfect. The media mocked the event. They called it a multi-million-dollar publicity stunt. But the media completely missed the point. The store closure was not just about coffee chemistry. It was a massive, undeniable physical signal to the entire organization. It proved, with terrifying financial consequences, that leadership was finally prioritizing quality over revenue. It broke the operational hypnosis of the company. It told every single employee, the era of the mindless assembly line is over. We are artisans again. But Schultz didn't stop there. He aggressively targeted the burnt cheese. He demanded that the food science team reformulate the breakfast sandwiches immediately. He told them that if they could not find a way to cook the sandwiches without destroying the aroma of the coffee, he would permanently ban them from the menu, sacrificing hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue. It was an impossible ultimatum. But forced by absolute necessity, the food team innovated. They discovered that by changing the type of cheese, altering the cooking temperature, and re-engineering the ovens, they could retain the sandwiches without ruining the scent of the store. The coffee aroma returned. Next, he attacked the towering espresso machines. Schultz partnered with a Swiss manufacturer to deploy a brand new machine called the Mastrena. It was still highly efficient, but it featured a drastically lower physical profile. The barrier between the customer and the barista was physically destroyed. The line of sight was restored. The customer could once again see the shot being poured. The human connection was mandated by the very architecture of the equipment. Schultz was systematically rebuilding the third place. But he also knew that looking backward was not enough. While restoring the traditional soul of the company, he had to drag their technology infrastructure into the 21st century. Starbucks launched My Starbucks Idea, a massive crowdsourced digital platform that allowed customers to submit ideas directly to corporate headquarters. It was a brilliant move that instantly re-engaged an alienated customer base. It told the consumer, "We are listening again." More importantly, this era birthed the Starbucks Rewards program and the integration of mobile payment technology. Long before Apple Pay or widespread mobile ordering, Starbucks built a closed-loop digital ecosystem. By incentivizing customers to preload money onto digital cards, Starbucks quietly became one of the most powerful unregulated banks in the world, holding billions of dollars in zero-interest consumer floats. They perfectly married the romantic, analog experience of the third place with the frictionless, digital efficiency of the future. The turnaround took time. The financial crisis of 2008 battered the company for another year. It was a dark, terrifying period of corporate restructuring. But by 2010, the strategy undeniably took hold. Same-store sales exploded. The stock price skyrocketed, recovering all its losses and reaching unprecedented new all-time highs. Starbucks didn't just survive the recession. They emerged from it stronger, more disciplined, and more globally dominant than ever before. This entire saga, from the rapid expansion to the brutal contraction, is driven by one single, overriding philosophy. And this brings us to the core insight. The absolute secret behind the Starbucks resurrection. This brings us to the aha moment. Starbucks does not sell coffee. They never have. Coffee is simply the biological anchor for the actual product. The actual product is human connection. When Starbucks forgot this, when they optimized their operations to compete with fast food chains on speed and price, they entered a game they were fundamentally destined to lose. McDonald's will always be faster. Dunkin' will always be cheaper. The secret of Howard Schultz's turnaround was realizing that extreme efficiency is often the enemy of premium experience. By intentionally slowing down the service, by forcing baristas to manually monitor the crema, by lowering the machines to force eye contact, Schultz was intentionally reintroducing friction into the transaction. But it was a beautiful, necessary friction. It was the theater of the craft. By prioritizing the emotional state of the barista and the sensory environment of the store over raw transactional volume, he rebuilt the economic moat. He created an experience that no fast food chain could ever artificially replicate. However, executing a massive cultural realignment across 100,000 employees is an absolute logistical nightmare. When Howard Schultz closed the stores in 2008, his biggest challenge was communicating a complex, emotional message to a massive, dispersed frontline workforce. He had to rely on printed memos, DVDs shipped to stores, and a slow cascade of information through middle management. If your frontline workers, the people actually interacting with your customers, are disconnected from corporate leadership, your brand culture will inevitably rot from the inside out. You cannot rebuild an empire if your headquarters has no direct line to the people pouring the coffee, stocking the shelves, or operating the machinery. That is exactly why modern retail and hospitality giants rely on Connecteam. Connecteam is the ultimate all-in-one app designed specifically for the deskless workforce. Instead of relying on chaotic WhatsApp groups, bulletin boards in the break room, or slow email chains, Connecteam puts your entire operational and cultural hub directly into the pockets of your frontline employees. If you want to pull off your own operational turnaround, you need absolute alignment. Connecteam allows you to instantly broadcast video updates from leadership, deploy standardized training modules, manage scheduling effortlessly, and gather real-time feedback directly from the floor. It bridges the massive, dangerous gap between the corporate boardroom and the frontline worker. It ensures that the people representing your brand actually understand the soul of your company. You can start aligning your deskless workforce and building an unbreakable company culture today by clicking the link in the description to try Connecteam for free. When you strip away the green aprons, the seasonal lattes, and the global ubiquity, the Starbucks turnaround is blindingly simple. Growth is intoxicating. Efficiency is profitable. But if you sacrifice your core identity on the altar of scale, the market will eventually destroy you. Howard Schultz saved his company because he had the terrifying courage to stop the machine, look his employees in the eye, and demand that they go back to the basics. He understood that in a world of automated, frictionless convenience, the most valuable commodity on earth is genuine, unhurried human connection. If you learned something new, hit the like button and subscribe for more strategy breakdowns. And let us know in the comments, what company's strategy should we unlock next?